Today, new documents in the New York fraud case against Donald Trump reveal that the ex-president's attacks on the judge's clerk resulted in, I'm quoting here, hundreds of threatening and harassing messages against her. According to this filing by an officer in the court's Judicial Threats Assessment Unit, the clerk's personal information, including her personal cell phone number, have been compromised, resulting in daily doxing. She has been subject to, on a daily basis, harassing, disparaging comments and anti-Semitic tropes, which the officer notes increased in number when Donald Trump violated a gag order aimed at preventing him from making public comments about the court staff. A New York appeals court issued a pause on that gag order last week, which will remain in place at least through Monday. Lisa Rubin is an MSNBC legal analyst. Catherine Christian is a former prosecutor in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and they both join me now. Lisa, let me just start with you on who made this filing and in what context did we get this information?
So we got this filing on behalf of Judge Engoron, made by the Office of Court Administration. There's a lawyer there who is effectively representing him in this proceeding. And you might ask, why does he need his own lawyer here? It's because this isn't an ordinary appeal. This is a particular type of lawsuit in New York State where you can sue a governmental official for unconstitutional or unlawful actions. So what Trump is doing here is suing Judge Engoron himself, and therefore the Office of Court Administration is stepping in as his lawyer. The affirmation that you're referring to was filed by basically the equivalent of a police officer for the court system who works for the Judicial Threats Assessment Unit.
You worked in New York City in the court system.
Still do.
And still do. This kind of thing directed at a clerk of the court. I mean, it's one thing, right? Like if you run for district attorney of Manhattan, you're going to take some incoming, right? Like there's going to be people saying nasty things about you. You may have to worry a little bit about security, but you know that when you're doing, not to say that it's okay, but it's just a little bit of a different thing. A court clerk, like have you ever encountered a situation in the time that you've worked in the New York City court system of that level of public harassment targeted at someone like that?
Unheard of. A judge's law clerk, it's I don't want to say they're a potted plant, but when you go to court as a lawyer, you don't deal with the law clerk. Sometimes judges will have the law clerk, speak to the attorneys to help with settlement, but it's the judge that makes the decision. So in this case, not just Donald Trump, to have the lawyers that have been attacking this law clerk is just unprecedented. It's just unheard of.
And it's not just, it's one thing if you're this clerk, right, and you have been against your will elevated to a public figure by one of the most, the biggest platforms in the person of Donald Trump. It's one thing for people to say nasty things about you out in the world in the internet. It's horrible, but that's one level. What's revealed in this filing is that, she's getting 50 phone calls a day or something. I mean, her life is disrupted.
Yeah, she's been doxxed. Her address is in the public domain. Her personal emails have been compromised. Her personal cell phone has been compromised. She gets dozens of messages, as you mentioned, on her social media, her personal email, and her personal cell phone every day. And the threatening phone messages and voicemails that have been directed at the judge and the clerk combined fill 275 single-spaced pages as transcribed. To me, that was the thing about this filing that stood out the most, was just the sheer volume of the hate.
I'm sorry, but this is unacceptable. Entirely unacceptable. We cannot run a system like this. It cannot be the case that you can use the leverage of your platform to essentially, by other means, paint a target of intimidation upon a court. This is I feel like I'm reading about some dystopian state where the rule of law has unraveled.
Yeah, and it shows, this is proof. If you want proof that Donald Trump's words when he attacks someone has the effect of encouraging threatening behavior, threatens, this is proof. This poor law clerk here, who he puts her photo up, and he also linked to her personal Instagram on that social media, and it just started, and it hasn't stopped.
This also just seems a real test for me. I mean, you've got the protective order that Judge Chutkan issued, which is now being appealed and working its way through. And again, Donald Trump is the amazing example of you get as much process on the U.S. system of justice as you can afford. Not everyone gets this much process, but Donald Trump does, which, fine, great. That's his constitutional right. I wish everyone had it. But, that's working its way up. Someone's got to draw some real hard lines here. I really feel like I'm watching this, ridiculous testing thing happening where I can see what's happening. I can see what the threat is. I don't know why I'm getting worked up. I just find this like completely unbearable.
Well, Chris, you know that I've been sitting in this courtroom for weeks and days on end. I've been watching this trial. And to watch that law clerk and Judge Goran come to do their jobs every day and steel themselves to preside over a trial in which they are daily attacked is really hard to watch. But in terms of drawing lines, it shouldn't also be the case that you only get to make this showing if you're represented by the court system. You know, in some respects, Judge Goran and his law clerk were very lucky in that there is a police officer who is able to dimension the size and scope of the threat.
Yes.
But Fani Willis had some trouble yesterday in a similar hearing with respect to Harrison Floyd and his bond revocation because
he's one of the co-defendants in that Georgia RICO case.
Right.
And he's a publicist who's associated with that weird episode in which a woman went down to try to get the two election poll workers to falsely confess.
Correct. And she had some trouble demonstrating yesterday that Harrison Floyd's posts about this woman, Ruby Freeman, an election worker, were in fact threats. Why? Because there's nobody appointed by the government who was writing them down or transcribing them. And it shouldn't be the case that you should have to report to police or get the police involved for a judge to believe that's a credible threat that violates conditions of release or a gag order that's in place.
I mean, look, the First Amendment is really important, and there are novel First Amendment issues here with the person who's running for president of the court. There is, and I really pay deference to those. But there's something insidious here, Catherine, that it's like when Trump tweets, Mike Pence didn't have the courage while the mob is overfilling the Capitol. He knows what he's doing. We all know what he's doing. In some technical sense, you could say, like, he didn't technically tell the mob, go try to kill that dude. But, like, 2 + 2 does equal 4, and he's doing the same thing here, and someone has to be able to say 2 + 2 = 4.
Right. We now have what we call a pattern of behavior with Donald Trump. You sort of put all the pieces together, say that constantly about Mike Pence, and then what do we hear? Hang Mike Pence. Yeah. And the Secret Service has to, take him away. So he constantly does this drumbeat. I hope that the D.C. Circuit reads this affidavit that was filed in this New York Appellate Division, and, they'll, judges pay attention, and we'll see what the cause and effect is when Donald Trump speaks.
We're waiting on that order out of the D.C. Circuit as well. We're waiting on a resolution on this lawsuit against Judge Goran, Lisa Rubin, and Catherine Christian. Great to have you both.
Thank you.